I still sometimes like catch myself thinking, oh my God, can we just get on with it? Whatever someone does, you put on like a super pessimistic, like grumpy spin on it. And for us as Austrians, it's really funny. But like for someone else, like my husband, for example, he's like, why is this funny? You're just like grumpy all the time. She can speak Spanish to me and I will just like eat it up.
Hello and welcome to the latest Dating Beyond Borders episode. If you've been listening for a while, you know I love exploring the world of intercultural couples. And today's guest is just that. She's an Austrian, married to an Australian. Yes, really, a linguist, and works with intercultural couples herself. She has even recently gave a TED Talk on why love is harder in second language, and that's exactly what we're diving into today. We'll talk about why languages carry different emotional weights, whether you're funnier in some languages than others, why saying I love you can feel completely different depending on the language, and how language affects conflict. So I'm super excited for this conversation. Let's get into it. Welcome, Magdalena.
Hi, Marina. Nice to see you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. I think we focus on something quite similar in a way because, as I said, my focus, a lot of my focus is intercultural couples. You're in one, and your focus specifically is the linguistic part of it, right? How language shapes how we are, how we think, how we come across. And I really, really loved your TED Talks. I thought it was really, really interesting. And you mentioned that you're a linguist yourself. So what languages do you speak?
I come to the topic with a whole like the language perspective, which is really like my topic. I myself, I speak 6 languages, not all super fluent, but yeah, so German or like Austrian German is my mother tongue. And then I learned English as my second language, French, Italian, Spanish, and then a little bit of Dutch.
Okay, very interesting. Do you also speak High German?
Yes, I do. I guess we learn it in school, but just if you're not fully aware of the difference between Austrian German and German, or like High German. High German is what we learn in school. High German is sort of, spoken in Germany. They have a lot of variants and dialects as well. But in Austria, we speak Austrian German. And even though it's such a small country, we have so many different variants and dialects. So it is sort of a version, like a dialect version of High German. So we speak it, we understand it, but often vice versa, Germans don't quite understand us because just the words and the structure and the way we say things is so fundamentally different.
That's so interesting. I have kind of a funny question for you because you're an Austrian dating an Australian and you live in Australia. Do you ever get kind of jokes about that? Because I don't know if this is necessarily true or not, but they said that there was an actual airport help service I think it was in Austria for people that went to the wrong country. I'm not sure how you go to the wrong country, but yeah, is that a myth? Is that truth? And what reactions do you get when you say that you're Austrian?
Not a myth. It is true. And yeah, I used to get a lot of those confusions sort of when I started traveling in Australia and like in hostels. People would ask, "Oh, where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, from Austria." And they're like, "Oh, you're from here? That's so cool. You travel your own country." And I'm like, "Yeah, not quite, Austria." And my husband and I, we sort of have a nickname for ourselves. I'm not sure if we gave it to ourselves or if our friends gave it to us, but we call ourselves Australians, sort of like that mix of Austrian and Australian.
What is it?
Australians. Yeah.
Nice. So what made you decide to come to Australia and how did you meet your husband?
Yeah, we met quite a long time ago. We met in 2015, so about 10 years ago. It wasn't by chance, but we met in Australia. So I was traveling Australia with my sister. He already knew my sister, so we met up on purpose. And so sort of my sister was our Cupid, you could say. And soon after, like we traveled together, Australia, and then soon after he came over to Europe and then he moved there. So we met in Surfers Paradise. And we lived in Austria for a really long time, about 6 years. And then I did sort of like a gap year in Australia, really loved it, loved the lifestyle, loved the people. And then we decided to move to Australia. And now we've been living here for 3.5 years.
Very interesting. About your husband, let's kind of start with some of the differences that you've noticed in general. Not touching upon the linguistic differences yet, because that's going to be a hot topic for us. But um, just in general, either with your husband or living in Australia, what has been some of the culture shocks that you've had to kind of not necessarily struggled with, but felt a little bit different?
Yeah. Oh my God, where to start? I always find this a really difficult question because I do think Austria and Australia are both sort of Western countries. So in terms of that, there's actually not that many differences. Like the holidays are the same. The kind of 9 to 5 work culture, very similar, are the same. But in everyday living, there's quite a few differences, like the smaller nuances of things. Sort of like how Aussies organize their day. Obviously, they're way more laid back and way more relaxed in their way of living. Whereas Austrians, like we like to plan things. We're very structured in that kind of sense. We're a lot more direct. We just like come out and say straight up what we think, what we mean, what we want. Whereas Aussies kind of sort of like do that little dance around the bush kind of thing. Even small things like going to the beach is felt so different because when I go to the beach or when I would go to the lake in Austria, I would just like I pack up everything. This is like a full day kind of situation. Whereas my husband would just, very standard Aussie, you don't really bake in the sun because the sun like is so dangerous and so intense. You just go for a swim and come back. And so those are sort of like the little things we had to negotiate at the start of our relationship. Like just tiny little things. When it comes to dating, though, I do think there's also smaller differences, but on the whole, the dating scene, I'd say, is quite similar in terms of, etiquette, like who reaches out first, sort of like the sequencing of dating, like how you start up, how you kind of keep in touch via texting or calling, sort of like finalizing the relationship. Those sorts of things are quite similar, I'd say.
They say that I would say German speakers. I don't know if that necessarily relates to Austrians because I do think that Austrians are softer in communication than the Germans. But I really want to hear your take on it because you're a linguistic expert. Um, and then you touched upon this because you said in Australia people are still there. They can be fairly direct compared to certain places, maybe New Zealand, but they're still fairly softer and more indirect than your average German, maybe to a lesser extent, and Austrian. So have you felt like you had to tone that part of yourself down? Do you ever feel like, oh, maybe people take me as overly direct at times?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I had to tone myself down quite a lot of times, both in work situations and relationship situations or just social interactions. And at the start of our relationship, or like when I started moving here, I think my husband like sort of told me quite a lot and like was a little bit, I guess, my coach or my mentor saying like, oh, we don't really say it like that. And it's not that I guess I didn't come on really strong or like in a harsh way. But just those tiny little things like, well, you start up a conversation first before you ask the thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, got it. Whereas in Austria, I would just like come straight out because I don't have time for that fluff kind of thing. So that was probably a big one to adapt for me.
Yeah, it's like the work conversations where Americans, for example, or maybe Australians give the feedback sandwich. Oh, that was great, but um, and it's funny, right? Because it's like the efficiency thing. It's like Germans and Austrians are like, no, let's get down to business. I don't have time for this fluff, and it's also not genuine. So why don't we just talk about the thing, right?
Yeah. 100%. I still sometimes like catch myself thinking, "Oh my God, can we just get on with it?" But on the whole, I do love sort of the environment of Australians being really nice to each other and sort of doing that. Like even when you go to the service station to get fuel, and even like people there are so nice and like, oh, how's your day going? And those like sort of little, bits and pieces that you always say. And I know sometimes it feels not genuine to me as an Austrian because he doesn't genuinely care how I am, but it's still nice to do that because it just creates sort of a nice environment. And I do really love that. I'd rather have that than, the sort of directness or, maybe even grumpy sort of Austrian kind of environment sometimes.
Where are you from in Austria, actually?
I'm from Salzburg.
Salzburg. Okay, that's so funny because when I was in Salzburg, I went on a date with an Austrian guy and he was like, "Your energy is so refreshing. Everyone here is so grumpy." And I really wish I had more North American energy. And I was like, I don't actually think I have much of this North American energy, but to him, I felt like a cheerleader, like this all American cheerleader. And I'm from Canada, but it was funny. It was funny. Like he really, it felt refreshing for him just because I guess you don't see that very often.
Yeah, that actually hits home 100%. I think Austrians can have so we there's this like very specific type of humor that we have. It's called Wiener Schmäh, like Viennese sort of like wit. And the whole essence around it is sort of like a pessimistic view on everything. Like everything people do or everyone like whatever someone does, you put on like a super pessimistic, like grumpy spin on it. And for us as Austrians, it's really funny. But like for someone else, like my husband, for example, he's like, why is this funny? You're just like grumpy all the time. And so I think this sort of like in like sort of transfers into our culture quite a lot. That sort of like, I don't know, that like flowing grumpiness or like pessimism. And to us, it can be really funny, but sometimes, it's just what it is as well.
Do you have an example of that kind of joke?
Um, I don't know. I reckon like the weather might be a big one. Austria's weather is not amazing all the time, especially in Salzburg. It's right above the Alps. So like we get all the rain all the time. So I grew up in rain. So we just, we have to joke about it, but like we do it in sort of a negative way. We complain about the weather all the time, even though we're totally used to it.
I wonder why Austrians are so grumpy. Do you think it has to do with the history, the wars, and everything?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wonder if it was already pre-war like that, or if this came sort of about the history of our country, which went through quite a lot of, negative periods there.
Everyone, just a quick note to say that while I love putting these podcasts together each week, they do take a ton of time and effort. So if you're enjoying the show, please be sure to follow on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you're tuning in, and give this podcast a 5-star rating to help it grow. This support really helps me keep improving the show's quality. Thank you, and back to the episode.
Yeah. Yeah, I always wonder about this because Anglos are kind of the same in so many ways. Like if you meet your average Australian, Canadian, Kiwi, American, there are similarities between the sense of humor, the way they, the small talk, those kind of things. And so it's funny how there's so many similarities, even though they live in there are so many different separate countries. Obviously, the UK is a lot more sarcastic than like your average Australian would be, or an American especially. Speaking about the sense of humor, because that's one of the things that you touched upon in your TED Talk, which was really interesting, because I think such a sense of humor is such a cultural thing. And you'd already touched upon this, that Austrians have a very, when you were talking and was watching your TED Talk, I was thinking, it's funny she mentions this because I heard that Austrians have a really pessimistic sense of humor. And so Australians don't. And I wonder how it is for her to make jokes in Australia, or the stuff that she finds funny and maybe her husband doesn't really find funny. That was, so when you said it right now, that was kind of an aha moment. But have you felt that in Australia, like your sense of humor doesn't shine through?
Yeah, massively. So humor was a really, really big part of me because I would consider myself a very funny person in Austrian German. I'm sort of like very dry, sort of deadpan delivery, kind of sarcasm kind of way. And I felt like I couldn't bring that whole same energy to English. And I was really grieving that part of my personality at first. And I would always say to my husband, Michael, you don't even know how funny I am. Like it's such a big part of me that you're not accessing, that you're not seeing, that you're not experiencing about me. And he would always say, "Oh, you're so funny. Like, what are you saying? Like, you're really, really funny." But I do feel like I am different funny in English. I wonder if it's like from, watching a lot of American shows, like, I don't know, New Girl or How I Met Your Mother, these sort of sitcoms. Um, and then also Aussie culture and sort of how, their Aussie slang terms and their idioms that are in itself really funny and humorous. It's sort of like adapted quite a bit. But I don't think I have that same deadpan delivery in English that I would have in German. So quite different. And it also sort of shapes my personality, I guess, quite a bit.
Yeah, you kind of sounded like Gloria from Modern Family just now when you said, if you only knew how smart I was in Spanish. Um, I agree. And I think, what other cultures do you think have kind of a deadpan, sarcastic sense of humor?
I think, that's a tricky one. I'm not sure. I feel like Germans can have that as well. The British they're also quite sarcastic and sort of like that very low key kind of humor that I really appreciate as well. And I do think they also have quite a bit of deadpan humor as well. And Aussies, I would say, like anecdotally and, talking to my husband, they really appreciate British humor as well. They're probably more aligned with British humor themselves than American, which like historically makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree with the British. I mean, British, they're renowned for their sense of humor. We all know that they're funny in their own way. And I just did a set of interviews. I was in the north of the UK and north of England, sorry. And I was laughing so much. And before that, I was in Spain and I was like, I don't get the sense of humor. It's not funny to me, you know? Um, but it felt like I didn't have to. So I kind of understand what you're saying with there's a deadpan kind of sarcasm that you don't have to be like, oh, this is a joke, you don't have to be like here's the punchline. And so I think American sense of humor for me is funny, but sometimes I prefer the sarcasm, and I feel like there's not a lot of it, especially here in Canada. And so I miss that because in certain cultures I kind of like this, like when you say something and then people respond to, and it's kind of like you don't have to try to be funny, but it's just kind of, you know, it's that like sarcasm, it's real somehow.
Yeah. And I also think there's this whole aspect to overdoing a joke or over explaining a joke, which doesn't make it funny anymore. And sort of that, like that sneaky delivery as well. Like I have a British friend here and he just sneaks so many jokes past me. I'm sure I've missed millions by now. But he's just like so subtle in his delivery. And sometimes, 5 minutes later, I realize, oh my God, Jim, did you say that? And I love that kind of humor. That's really, really funny.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And then when we let's talk about emotions, because I really, really like this topic about how emotion is expressed. And one of the things that you talked about was saying, I love you. And it is so, so interesting to me because I wrote a book about dating in Scandinavia, which is super random. But when I was interviewing Scandinavians and I was asking them, what is it like saying I love you in, let's say, Danish or Swedish or Norwegian? They're like, well, it's so heavy. It's not something we say a lot, but it's also like, it's my own language. I can say it easily in English, right? And so that's what you said in the TED Talk. So talk to me a little bit about saying I love you, how it's been for you or any of the couples that you work with. And is it easier or harder to say it in your own language?
Yeah, that was probably my favorite topic that I've researched with intercultural couples or like cross-cultural couples. Super, super interesting. So it's sort of that idea that language really influences our thinking. And in that sort of realm, it means that if we say something in one language, it holds a different emotional weight to if we say it in, for example, our first language. So example, saying I love you for me as a German speaker, it feels a lot more meaningful and a lot heavier, a lot more emotional if I say it actually in German. So if I say ich liebe dich, means a lot more to me. And the reason is because I grew up with it. So I've heard it from my parents. I've heard it all throughout my life. And it was sort of like also the first ich liebe dich that I would say to like a boyfriend or growing up or to my parents or to my sister. So it really, because it is my first language and I grew up with it, it just means so much more, which means that saying I love you in English feels almost a little bit detached or like foreign. And that's what a lot of couples or a lot of partners would experience if they say it in their languages. So if we have a French-Japanese couple and they use English together as their common language, which in linguistics we call English as a lingua franca, our contact language, which one do they choose? Do they choose, French and Japanese, or do they use English because this is their couple language? And then how does that feel for them? For me specifically, I think with I love you in English, I have sort of this, this sounds maybe like a little bit stereotype, but this Americanized connotation with it where, it just like it's thrown around so much. You just say it all the time. You say it to friends and to even to colleagues and to everyone. Oh yeah, love you, bye. Yeah, love you. And so to me, that makes like the meaning, like it lessens the meaning a lot. Whereas saying ich liebe dich, that's something like really heavy. And like you said, in Scandinavia, we also don't say it a lot. It's like very, very meaningful and very heavy.
And yeah, you just said, I don't know if that's somehow weird or silly, but I think it's actually what I found to be true as well, is that in English, so my first language is Russian. I'm Russian Ukrainian. And so in my culture, I love my parents. I'm super close to my mom, but it was kind of weird and cringy for my mom to say, I love you, Like I watched Hollywood movies, and maybe you did the same, and you thought, why are they always saying I love you every time they hang up the phone? It's almost like it means nothing. And I know they do it for a good reason. It's like, what if it's the last time you talk to each other? You should say it. But it also, as you said, it dilutes the feeling as well. Because it's like, if you say it so much, then there's no weight to it any longer. It's just like, love you, love you, love you. And we never said it in my family. We just assumed it. It was just there. Like, we would say it once in a while, but we would never say it like every single day. And so it's funny that you said that in American movies, or Americans in general, they just use it so often and with so many things. I love pizza. I love tacos. I love the beach. Oh my God, I love this. I love you. And so I think that's really funny, right? Like, you can meet someone and then 10 minutes later, you're like, oh my God, I love you. And it's like, do you really? Do you really? And so that's when a lot of Europeans, they go, that is superficial. That is not real. Right? And I know you probably feel the same as an Austrian.
Yeah. We sort of have a bunch of different expressions in German. Like we have a very popular one called hab dich lieb, which means it's sort of like a lesser version of I love you. It's really, really cute. So it comes probably, a lot of kids say it to each other, or like, it's sort of like the first stage of when you start dating. You wouldn't say ich liebe dich straight away. You would go with I like you, or like ich mag dich, and then go on to hab dich lieb. And that's like really, really cute.
Interesting. Growing up, is that a phrase that you heard a lot?
Yeah, absolutely. All the time. Yeah, all the time. I still do. Yeah.
So it's not that it wasn't commonly used. It's almost that it's because it's in your own language, and because it's so, the weight is so heavy on that phrase.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the thing, like this is something that feels really intimate and really heavy for me, but obviously my partner doesn't know that phrase at all. So if I said it to him, he would be like, "What?" And rightly so. And I'm sure also vice versa. There's other expressions or things or sentiments that he would express, and I'd be like, "Oh, wow!" Like, what does that mean? Or what sort of level of love are we talking about here? Or similar to humor, he would say something and I'd be like, oh, what sort of, is that offensive? Is it fine? Those are sort of the things you have to negotiate. 10 years into the relationship, this is sort of all discussed and done and dusted. But at the start, this was a huge factor.
What do you mean? What happened?
Well, we had our fair share of misunderstandings, and we still do, definitely. That doesn't go away ever. But I think even if you're, in a monolingual couple, like everyone speaks the same language, or two different ones, in sort of the getting to know each other phase, the start of dating, you have to negotiate so many things, like this is as far as I will go, and this is, sort of my boundary. And I think when you have two cultures at stake, there's just so much more to talk about and negotiate in that space.
I agree with you. I definitely agree. And I think certain couples also have it harder because certain cultures are also less, I don't want to say they're less compatible, but there's definitely a lot more work that needs to go into it because it's just they come from such different values that you really need to communicate incredibly well. Because for one couple or for one person in the couple, that's just normal. And the other person thinks, oh, this person is either the gender roles or family individualism. Like there's so many things that can go wrong. But talking about this expression of emotion, you mentioned the French Japanese couple. I have a question for you, and maybe you won't have an answer to it, but do you feel like for certain couples or for certain cultures, it's harder to express emotion in general?
I couldn't. Yeah, that's a really good question. From my experience, like I guess the people in my surroundings or the people that I actually have done in-depth research with, um, I felt like Middle Eastern countries or like cultures, they just have a very different way of connecting intimately with others. And it felt fundamentally different to sort of like Western culture, which I'm more used to and I was grown, that I grew up with. But yeah, I also don't want to single out Middle Eastern either. I feel like it's just, I guess it depends on the combination, right? Like if you have a Middle Eastern partner with something sort of close by, you'll be fine. But Middle Eastern with, let's say, someone from Latin America, I can imagine that could be a very interesting combo.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Latin America because if we're talking about it, I always say like if we could crazily generalize, like if we could generalize a lot, like Latin Americans, they have the love language of tactility and words of affirmation. Overall, obviously, this greatly depends, but especially if you take someone that's like a Brazilian, tactility is just such an important way of how you show love. And so if you're with someone that doesn't match that, like you said, Middle Eastern or maybe Japanese, they say they're kind of it's not something they really like to show openly. I think it could be kind of frustrating and you really have to talk it over a lot, right? Yeah. And so you work with intercultural couples and how does this happen? Do you work with them through a school or how do you work with them?
No, yeah. So this was when I was doing my master's research at the University of Vienna. So I was studying linguistics or like as becoming a language teacher, but my specialty was linguistics, and I wanted to work with intercultural couples or cross-cultural couples to sort of identify what are the issues, what are, the great things, sort of like the advantages and disadvantages about it. And it turned into a whole sort of deep dive into language and specifically how language is used. Because very often when we talk about cross-cultural couples, we talk about the cultural aspects, like how do you negotiate that, but not a whole lot of language struggles specifically. So like idioms or like sort of that emotional weight of different languages, fighting and conflict. Also, there was a part of the study that looked into sort of like bedroom talk, because that is, sort of like a very specific thing to intimate partners that we don't see in the workplace. So yeah, we have it a lot in friends or like in workplace culture, but like in intimate partners, that hasn't been done a lot. So yeah, it was really interesting.
You know what I'm going to ask you next? The bedroom talk. I want to hear it. Well, I don't want to hear it from you, but I want to hear about it.
Yes. It was sort of like like an optional question. I was like, do you, because I interviewed couples together. And it's something very, very personal. So I made it like an optional question. But the question was sort of like in terms of bedroom talk, like, or, dirty talk or whatever you want to call it. What do you have a preference in language between the two of you? Are there, ever any issues in terms of, I don't understand this or something like that. And what I remember, this is a few years ago, what I remember, there was one couple, one was from Nicaragua and one was from Austria as well. And so the male guy was, the guy was from Austria. He was like, oh, she can speak Spanish to me and I will just like eat it up. Like I will have that any day, even if I don't understand it. It's just very sexy. And vice versa. She was like, yeah, Austrian doesn't turn me on at all. So a lot of people said that Austrian is not a sexy language. And I wholeheartedly agree. Absolutely.
It's funny how certain languages are sexy in bed. And like, if someone's like, because I used to have this crazy thing for German. I thought it was the sexiest language. And women used to look at me like, what is wrong with you? What is wrong? Do you like BDSM? No, but I like my first ever boyfriend was German. And I don't know, I just kind of always found the language to be very masculine. And so on men, I always found it to be dominant. There was like a sense of dominance, which I know most women, they prefer French or Italian or Spanish, very predictable. But for me, it was like, no, German did the trick. And so, yeah. When you said right now, you said obviously Austrian German is a little bit different. Like not everybody wants an Arnold Schwarzenegger. Sorry I know you don't sound like Arnold, but,
oh, a bunch of us do. Don't worry.
I have met some that actually did sound like Arnold, which was really funny. But no, I know it does vary. But no, I think like it's still like kind of there's a more of a dominance to the language, which could be some people's thing. But obviously, if you tell someone, oh, they're going to speak Spanish or Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese in bed, there's a preference for that, right? Is that what you found as well? That certain languages, there's a preference for that.
Yeah, I would say so. I couldn't like verify it based on my research because it was a very small study, but yeah, that's sort of what I found, or the experiences that we talk about, with friends and things like that. There's certain accents or certain, words or certain, sort of tonalities in languages that we're more attracted to. Like I find Spanish, for example, very intriguing and very sexy. But yeah, and certain others we just don't. Yeah.
And it's funny because I used to have this series on YouTube back a few years ago when I did my channel, which was called Sexiest Languages. And what we would do is we would blindfold the person and we would get them to listen to different languages and rate them, from the sexiest to the least sexy. I actually did a German version as well, doing German, Austrian, Swiss, which was kind of weird, but it did really well. And I did them in many, many languages. But obviously, the preference was always the same. It was like Brazilian Portuguese over Portuguese. We did, it was French Canadian versus French, and then people picked French. Obviously, this is not statistical in any way, shape, or form, but there are preferences. And then within Spanish, we also rated which was like the sexiest Spanish. But obviously, like I think if you'd ask around the world, because I usually ask these questions, people would say it would be either Spanish, Italian, or French, or Brazilian Portuguese, and it's all you see the pattern here, right? All
Yeah,
Romance
it's all
languages.
romantic languages. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's so interesting. I personally feel like French is like so soft, like maybe because I speak it as well, but French is so soft. So like you said, like in a man, for example, that dominant side, I couldn't relate that probably.
Exactly. It's more like an elegant. It's like, I'm going to seduce you. I'm going to take your stockings off with my teeth. That's the feeling that you get. Whereas, like, if you get some Brazilian Portuguese, you're like, okay, there's like a lot of passion that's going to happen here. So it's like different connotations with different languages that you also get. Like I said, for me, German was very dominant. And I guess now, actually, with the rise of social media, there's more of a focus on German, German men and dating Germans. And a lot of women are really into that. So it's kind of interesting. I'm not saying I'm still into that. I'm just saying that used to be a part of my life where that was sexy for me. But yeah, that's an interesting conversation. If anyone's listening to this, it would be interesting to hear what is their sexiest language of choice. And if they want their partner to speak that language in the bedroom, kind of interesting. Or if they want them to speak English.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating. Yeah. But of course, so much of it comes down to personal preference.
Exactly. Now, I'm actually curious too. Did anyone say, like, no, I don't want my partner to speak in bed, or I don't want to speak dirty in bed at all?
Yeah, a lot of people said that actually. Yeah. But I can't say if it was because of the interview situation and sort of admitting it like on the record to someone. But that's what a lot of people said, like sort of, no, we don't really speak at all, or we speak English, which is our common language. And that sort of is the safety field, which is obviously really important.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, talking about arguments, conflict, talk to me about that because that was really interesting for me as well. And I think that's a huge part of being in an intercultural relationship. And that's something that you really have to work through if you come from two very distinct cultures. So tell me about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Fighting or like conflict. Fighting always sounds so strong, I guess, but like, having an argument or even a discussion is such a normal and everyday part of intimate relationships. There's no way you can get through a relationship without, having one of these. And if we do that sort of in a second language, it gets really, really tricky really quickly, because it's sort of like the heat of the moment kind of situation. And so we're being very emotional. All sort of reason, all sort of, rationality can go out the window very quickly. And if we are speaking in a second language, we sort of have to feel our emotions in, ourselves, which might be our first language, translate it into a second language and then say it out loud. And if we bring in things like swear words or cuss words or, anything really strongly, we have to make sure, they're the correct ones and they land correctly onto our partner. And we don't want to offend them. Or maybe we do, and then we just have to make sure that it's sort of like the correct level. So fighting can be really, really difficult in a second language. And I've really experienced that with my partner. We mostly speak English together, almost exclusively, really. And I found it, even though my English is really good, I know that I studied English at uni, so like it's fine. But in such situations, sometimes I feel it's such a loss of words and I don't know what to say and I feel really disadvantaged, which gets really, really tricky because I feel like he can win an argument or like a discussion any day. And I just have so much more to think about in the background and like my mind has to work double the speed to keep up with that.
I guess on the positive side, and maybe not, that's not the case in your relationship, but if you both come from different relationships and you have to take a pause before you speak, it can lessen the effect of the conflict. It can actually slow you guys down and make it better. But in your case, as you said, he's a native speaker, so you lose out just because you're not. You'd also mentioned that you said some words to him that were quite inappropriate in Australia.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. To your earlier point, that is absolutely true. Like, if you speak two different languages, it does make you pause, or like it can make you pause, which can really work in your favor. Like that sort of, think before you speak kind of mojo, which can work out really well. Yeah. Early on in our relationship, I sort of, dropped the C word, and didn't know what it meant. And he was like, oh my God. And I know Aussies say conversationally all the time, and it's not actually offensive, but just in the context, like the way I said it was like, I really meant it. And I just picked it up on the street. I knew it was an offensive word, didn't really know exactly, what it meant. And I just said it, and he was like, whoa, like just the way you said it right now, that was actually really offensive. And then that's sort of what you have to negotiate. I had another couple in the study as well. And early on in their relationship, I can't remember the language combo, but one of them was a native speaker of English. And she said to him in a, heat of the moment kind of situation, oh my God, you're such a useless piece of shit. And yeah, I know. Look at your reaction. Yes. Yeah. And she totally didn't mean it like that. I think it was like something like, picking out clothes. And she's like, what do you think of this? And he's like, well, everything looks fine. She's like, oh my God, such a useless piece of shit. And she didn't mean it, but obviously it landed like, front crash into the car kind of feeling. And she told me that, and I was like, whoa, yeah. Those are the sort of things that get really complicated sometimes.
Because he's the native speaker, you mentioned to me just now that you kind of feel like you're losing a lot of times. Would it have been easier if both of you were speaking English as a second language?
Yeah, I think it makes it a bit more of a neutral playing ground for everyone, saying, yep, this is our sort of neutral spot. Like, let's go back to the French-Japanese couple. They speak English together. This is sort of like the neutral third space for everyone. And then, of course, I guess it comes up to language proficiency of, how well you speak. But really what I would hope, in international couples, what would happen is that people are really careful and really considerate of each other's language proficiency, and also saying anything that's hurtful in the first place. And sort of making sure, you go step by step and slowly and make sure you understand each other.
Do you feel that when you speak English, you're a different person in some ways?
Yeah, I do. I do. And I think it's a mix of living in Australia and sort of adapting. It's like this push and pull of what do I keep about myself and my Austrianness, and what do I sort of leave behind, and what do I take up from the Aussies, and what else, do I say, nah, no thanks, mate. um, there's a lot in that. But I think this is just a general thing of moving abroad, right? You always negotiate, what do I keep and what do I leave behind. I think something I definitely adapted is sort of that friendliness, and I'm a lot more relaxed. I'm a lot more chill now. I've just recently been back at home in Austria for a trip, and everyone was like, oh my God, Maggie, you're so chill. Like, Australia is totally working on you. Like, you're so relaxed. And something I definitely kept is my Austrian work ethic, and just the way I do things, the way I organize things at work. And yeah.
Yeah, I love that because going back to getting the technical aspects right, like I love working with people for certain countries. Being German, Austrians are definitely at the top for me because you guys always come prepared. I've noticed that there is that pattern, which is really funny for the podcast. But it's interesting too because if you look at a German language, right, the way it's structured is you have to think differently, right? Because the combination of words and I don't know the language really, really well, but obviously, I think you use different parts of your brain to access that, right? Whereas English is just, it's formed differently. It's a lot more simple. It's less strict, I suppose. And then if you will, we look at Spanish, more so just the way the expressions. And even, for me, it's really interesting, even caring words, like how you call somebody. For example, in Russian and in Spanish and in Portuguese, we have diminutives, right? So we can say Magdalenita or Magdalenina, and so my ex-boyfriends would call me Marinina, whatever. And in Russian, it would be like Marinочка, or in your case, Magdalenochka. So you have those diminutives. And I don't know if that's something you do in German. Do you have that?
Yeah, we absolutely do. Yeah, we have the ending "chen" or "ling," I think. So like Magdalena would be Magdalenchen, or yeah, lots and lots of words like that. Yeah, we do. I wonder if they have it in English.
No, they don't. They actually don't, which is really funny, isn't it? That
Yeah, it's just
and
like little marina or whatever.
It does exactly, exactly. And also, I think in Latin American countries, what I kind of like is that they shorten everything. They have kind of that. It's important to have those caring words, like you call your mom gordita or "ay Rosita." I would be like Rosita, even though I've been out of Russia most of my life. But to them, or like I don't know, rubia or whatever, flaca, whatever. They have all these like little caring words, right? Which is also like such a big part of the culture. They'll shorten your name a lot. Like they'll give you a little nickname and stuff like that. And yeah, I don't think that's something you really. Although I have to say, Aussies do have that, don't they? They like to shorten
Oh,
stuff.
Aussies shorten everything. Yeah, they're so relaxed, but also there's no time to finish a word either, which is so funny. Yeah, they shorten everything. It's really funny, and you get into a habit of it so quickly. Like in Austria, I would never like the wine Sauvignon Blanc. In Australia, it's just Sauv Blanc, and yeah.
I don't want to drink that.
I didn't either. I was like, this feels wrong on so many levels. But you look like a wanker if you go up to the bar and say, "Can I have a glass of Sauvignon Blanc?" And you're like, "Sure. What else can we get you, precious little darling?" So you just like sort of adapt. But yeah, it's funny.
Has it ever been frustrating or annoying to you being like, okay, stop saying avo or whatever? Like just say the word.
I think I think Sauvignon Blanc is mine, where I'm like, just say the wine. Come on, let's just be nice. But I think most are okay. Most are okay. You just don't even think about it anymore, I guess.
When you come back to Austria, do you feel like you have to switch back to a different personality somehow?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I was just recently back at home, and then I feel like there's always these 2 days when at the start of the trip, where you're like in that limbo mode. You're like, where am I? You're also still jet lagged, and you feel like, okay, this is how things work back at home, and this is who I am as well. And also living with parents again, you're like, oh, okay, it's like a trip down memory lane. And all of a sudden, it's like this switch, and I'm back to like Austrian Maggie in so many ways. And that's really funny. Like if I go with my partner, I notice, when we live in Australia here, I'm so, like I said, I'm so much more relaxed and more chill, and like socializing with friends. It just like organically happens on the weekend here. But in Austria, everything is planned in advance. So when we go back and I'm like, okay, we're gonna, meet these friends over there, and we're gonna, tee up that thing right there. And he's like, still in his Aussie personality, of course, saying like, why do we have to know that right now? Like, why do we have to plan that already? But I'm back in my Austrian mode saying like, well, we have to know, these people have to get ready. They have to get prepared. We have to pack our things. And all of a sudden I noticed like that, sort of like being between two countries, being between two personalities, which gets really interesting.
Yeah, it is funny, isn't it? It's just because it's something that you have to do in order to be able to fit into that culture, right? Otherwise, you're just not going to see anybody because that's how it works there. And so it's funny how we adapt to those different environments.
Absolutely. It's all about adapting to the people. Like I'm adapting to the people here in Australia by being, more relaxed, because I know things are going to happen and work out anyway. But in Austria, I adapt to the people there because they're planners and they need to know. Otherwise, they plan something else and I'm not going to see my friends.
Have there been any other communication differences or interesting stories, anecdotes that you've noticed, you've experienced, you've heard of when it comes to either you and your partner or other intercultural couples?
I think, no, I think we touched upon it already. I reckon, like Aussie slang is probably the biggest one for me that I'm still catching up on. And I still hear new terms and new idioms every day or like on a weekly basis. And I'm like, ooh, what does that mean? And living here now for like 3.5 years, I'm like, ooh, do I ask or do I just think this is the correct version of it? I think that's still a really big part. But other than that, I think I can't think of specific examples.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because you've talked about how Australia has kind of changed parts of your personality just by living in this new country. And for me, that's always really interesting about what changes about you when you move to a new country, and you live with a partner from a different country as well. You know what I mean? So, and I think you realize a lot about yourself because through my intercultural relationships, I've learned that, oh, I actually am way more, because I always consider myself more Canadian, but I'm like, oh, I actually have some expectations that are somewhat Eastern European, in certain ways. And so it's interesting when you're with that partner and you realize, oh, these are aspects to me, like I'm a planner or whatever, that I didn't really consider when I lived in Austria because it just was so normal as well. And so have you had any realizations about Australian, I was going to say Austrian mentality and where you come from, that you didn't before you left Austria?
Oh, yes. So much. So much. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like traveling and like living abroad really shows you like the truth about yourself, right? It's like often slap in the face kind of situation. I think I learned so much about Austria from Australians. Obviously, the main thing in terms of history they ask is the World Wars and Nazis and how was that and how is that still treated, etc. So I really had to brush up on my own history again, moving here, and it's really interesting to have those conversations. Like, what do they learn in school, and how do they view Austria and Germany and that sort of part of history, and how do we learn about it? That was a really interesting one. In terms of, I guess, more of a personality aspect, I learned it's all often the same stereotypes that we have about Austrians, that we're, very direct, very straightforward, very organized, very often potentially even a bit mechanical, is all true. There is a grain of truth in all of that. There's a reason why we say that. And just seeing that juxtaposition and like that difference to Aussies, it just made it so much clearer.
I thought you were going to say all those stereotypes are not true, and then you went, all those stereotypes are true.
Yeah, there a lot of them anyway. Like a lot of them. I think that there's still some. Oh, can I think of an example? There's always some where people come up and they're like, "Is that true? Do you do that?" And I'm like, "No." Like, we don't live in the Middle Ages anymore.
But do Australians actually know anything about Austrians? I just feel like they're so far removed from Europe that they probably think you're the same as Germans.
Yeah. So Vienna gets mixed up with Venice a lot. Or they don't even know where Austria is in the first place. And I'm like, it's like Central Europe, like pretty much dead center. Like you can't get more central. And yeah, they know. Sometimes they're like, oh yeah, totally, I know where it is. But yeah, if they know it, the first thing, the first thing they know is The Sound of Music, the movie. So especially the older generations, they all know that one. So yeah, always a big winner.
It's funny, when I went to Austria and I asked them about Germans, Austrians said, oh no, Germans, they don't have a sense of humor. We have a way better sense of humor than the Germans. They're like humorless. Do you think that as well?
Kind of, yeah. But I know deep down that we're just the same. Like, okay, let me break this down for you with an example. The difference between Germany and Austria, because obviously we hate each other. And we as Austrians, we always say, oh my God, Germans, they're so unrelaxed and they're like, they have no humor and, all the classic stereotypes. But this is the difference between Austria and Germany. So when we go on holiday, and you would have probably seen this, if Germans go on holiday, they sort of get up really early in the morning at like 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. to reserve the poolside, the sun chair. And they put a towel down. And what Austrians do is we do the same thing. We just do it at like 7:30 or 8. So we just do it like an hour later, but we do the same shit. And then we go look at Germans and be like, oh my God, these guys are crazy. But also this is my sun chair. So that's sort of it. We do the same stuff, just in a little bit more of a nonchalant, maybe kind of way.
I love that. So it's such a great example. Completely different cultures, everybody. Just so you know, 1 hour difference. What was it? 1 hour difference? Oh my God, Maggie, thank you so much. What an interesting conversation. It was cool because Austria and Australia is not a combination that you see very often, and it's a funny one, isn't it? It's just so funny. It's like, did this actually happen? But yeah, I wonder if there are other Austrians in Australia, or are you one of the few?
I know there's a few around. There's a lot more Germans around, but they travel a lot more than us. I guess they're also way bigger than us. But I've met a few Austrians. Not specifically in Newcastle where I live, but Sydney or Melbourne. There'd be heaps of them.
Yeah, it's definitely true. Germans travel a lot more than Austrians. You definitely, I mean, Germans are everywhere, right? They have taken over. Anyways, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking part on the podcast. I really enjoyed talking to you. Also going to link your TED talk underneath so people can go check it out because I thought it was really, really cool. And where did you do that TED talk? Was it in Australia?
Yeah, it was in Australia. It was actually here in Newcastle.
Very nice. Yeah, I thought it was so cool because obviously I'm so interested in the topic of intercultural couples and also the whole idea of how culture shapes us and how language shapes us. And so it was interesting to talk to someone else who is deep in this topic as well. So thanks again.
Thank you. It was so much fun.
So guys, if you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to follow, rate, and share it with a friend who might need a little inspiration. If you have a question for Maggie, leave it below. She might get a chance to answer it. Until next time, stay curious and stay human. Bye.
Hope you all enjoyed the podcast. If you made it all the way through, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, follow on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you're watching or listening. Your support helps me bring in bigger guests and surprise you with even better episodes. Until next time.